Girls, to another broadcast, if you will, of the Journal Star Sports Writers podcast. I'm Kirk Wessler, holding down the fort today, and my guest is Bob LaCroix, longtime cross-country and track and field distance running coach here in Central Illinois, Peoria. Part of his career at Peoria High, part at Richwoods, retired in 2004. Cross-country is what the main subject will be today because we have the IHSA state meet here in Peoria at Detweiller Park on Saturday afternoon, or Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon. Bob has quite a coaching record. Let's hit that first. 292 dual meet victories, ranked 5th all-time in the state of Illinois among coaches. From 1971 to 76, his teams at Peoria High won 55 duels in a row to set a state record. It still ranks 6th all-time. And then had another long streak at Richwoods, a 35 in a row, early to mid-'80s. And more importantly, on the big scope of things here regarding the state meet, Bob was arguably the moving force behind getting the state meet moved to Peoria from Champaign back in 1970, before anybody ever dreamed of stealing the basketball championships away from Champaign. And he also laid out the famous 3-mile course that's known all around the country and is the spot where Craig Virgin set the record for 13 minutes, 50.6 seconds that still stands 45 years later. I think it was in 72 that he did that. So welcome, Bob. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Kirk. Appreciate it, and happy to be here, and honored to talk about the state meet and anything else that you've got on your plate tonight.
Well, let's get right to the state meet.
Okay.
You ran. Let me just set up your background a little bit. You ran in high school and obviously in college at Quincy, what's now Quincy University.
Correct.
And then directly to Peoria and began coaching.
Yeah, my first 3 years, in fact, I started in fall of 67, and I was a volunteer assistant for 3 years under Neil Wicker, and Neil had a fantastic program going, so when he moved on to get into administration, I got an opportunity to become the head coach of cross country. At that time, it was boys only, and so it was something I was familiar with. I was also the distance coach in track, and I started that my first year there in the spring of 68.
And so right there, as you became the head coach, is when the state meet moved to Peoria. How'd that come about? It had been at Savoy Golf Course in Champaign, right?
Actually, the Peoria High Invitational had been so successful, and Peoria High ran a great meet there, and under the tutelage of the people that were involved, and I would like to mention that Neil Wicker did a fantastic job in the transition of getting that state meet involved. Corky Robertson was our athletic director at that time, Harry Whitaker our principal, and they were all just totally on board. But we had done such a good job with the Invitational and a big meet, and it encompassed from northern Illinois down to southern Illinois.
There was actually more teams in that than there were at the state meet.
Correct,
at that time.
Yes, 44 teams, and there's
and
a reason for that, and I can explain
that
a little bit later.
Yeah,
but we had one class, but it was just a big meet for a lot of schools, and it had such a prestigious name to it. So the state came to us and asked if we would be interested in running the state meet and using our site at Detweiller. That's a very unique place at Detweiller because there are very few places where you can stand and watch an entire meet, or virtually almost the entire meet. And because of that, I think they wanted to try to expose the meet to the public. It was held in Urbana, Savoy Golf Course over there in Urbana. And I was there, I think it was in the let's see, it would be the 69, I think I saw the state meet there, and no one came. 300 people maybe, if that.
Wow.
And the coaches stood behind the starting line, and every now and then the runners went by you. Nobody went on the course. So the first time when we got the state meet, and the state said that they were going to move it, we did not expect anybody of any magnitude from fans. Well, we had several thousand showed up, and they were getting in the way of everybody, and we learned then what it means to have crowd control.
Yeah.
So we kind of moved on from there.
And part of that was because the word had gotten around about the site from the teams that had come to the Peoria High Invitational.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just for the benefit of people who have not been down there, the meet is run in Lower Detweiller Park. They're along Galena Road, Route 29. And it's on that wide open field. Most of the race is run on the larger end of that. Then you've got the little creek that runs through with a tree line, and there's about half a mile or so in that what they used to call, or they still call, the triangle, even though it's no longer a triangle.
Approximately half a mile. That's correct. Yeah.
In about the middle of the race, that's run on the other side of that tree line, but the rest of it's all out there, and it's just big loops around there. So, like you said, you can, if you move around just a little bit, you can see virtually the entirety of the 3-mile state championship race.
Yeah, since we start in the middle of the field and the start goes down the middle, of course, spectators have to be moved to either side. But once that middle is no longer being used for racing, then they are able to move from one side of the course to the other, as you said, and they have great mobility on the course. And if you're willing to move around, yes, you can see just about the entire race.
And so you get big crowds, and I mean the estimates are out there every year that there's well over 10,000 people that churn through over the course of the day. And I mean, back in when it was one class, when it first started, you'd have 10,000 people just show up for that one race.
Exactly.
That
yes.
one boys' race.
That's absolutely true. And I think the thing, too, to think about is that back then there was only one race. And that one race was without any technology that we have today. We had little cards that we had somebody's name written on. We'd use a paper clip. In fact, the very first year when the meet was assigned to us, all the sectional managers called me personally at my home to give me the results, and I would take those down in longhand as they read off the results of their sectional, and then we used that as our entry to know who was going to be there and whatever. So it was, and there was a lot to it.
And at the finish line, did you ever use the popsicle sticks? I can't remember from those first couple of years, or was it always just the index card with number one, number two?
We gave out an index card that we had written numbers on.
It was just some of the invitationals used popsicle sticks. You'd cross the finish line. You got popsicle stick number 17 or whatever it was.
The beauty of the old system is that they did stay in order. So if you're watching the meet and you're trying to maybe get some idea how somebody did as they walked through, they were in order. And so if you wanted to see were they in the top 25, top 50, whatever, you would able to kind of keep track of that.
Yeah.
And you could score the meet too from there. But it was a challenge to be quite honest.
And that's evolved now, obviously. I mean, they're wearing microchips on their bibs, and they don't even lace those into the shoes anymore, do they?
Right. I don't believe they do.
Yeah,
It's all bib, yeah.
So it's all timed, and then they've got video on there too that they can verify. Particularly those ones where two people hit the finish mat at the same time. And
in fact, we scored the meet there in the park, and then the results were shipped over to Peoria High School where the award ceremony was held, and results were run off there, and then they were made available to people that that may have been interested in results. So. Yeah.
Now, how did that? Because the awards are no longer given at Peoria High School; they're down in the park. But how did that idea come to do an awards ceremony at the school rather than in the park? And I mean, was that what had happened in Urbana?
I think it was. I don't think they did it at the golf course. I think they did go back to the school, and it kind of concerns me a little bit now that we don't do that anymore. Because number one, I think the venue is really neat to be able to recognize them in front of everyone. And I understand now with 3 classes in boys and girls races, it may be logistics of that might be very difficult. However, I would also like to see Peoria High School get the recognition for what they're doing with the meet.
As the
because
host.
They are hosting, they're putting the time and effort into it. And I know the IHSA is certainly involved as well. However, it's Peoria High School's meet, and when you go back to the school, everybody knew that. Mm-hmm. And I think that was something that I always thought was a pretty neat deal.
And that was a really neat ceremony too. I mean, the Peoria High gym was packed.
Well, the bands were playing.
If people seriously, I mean, bands come to this thing and play, play during the meet, play the fight songs and dueling fight songs on a band during a cross country meet. This is the only place of all the places I've worked and been and watched to watch cross country, this is the only place I've seen bands play.
Yeah, it's unique, and unless somebody has been in Detweiller Park and experienced this, they really can't understand what we're talking about, because it just the energy level is just off the charts in terms of what goes on there, and it's a huge undertaking for a school and an association to do this. But on the other hand, it's done for the athletes. Number one, we want to make sure that they're given every opportunity, and then secondly, the fans.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. So back to when the meet first came here, that first year, 1970, it was not the 3-mile course. It was run on the 2.67, if I remember the distance correctly.
Actually, that's correct, yes.
Yeah, that it had been there, that it had laid out, and that was run in the Peoria High meet.
Yeah, and the meet actually started down on the, would be the north end of the course, and then we went uphill, and what we discovered that first year was that there was such a backlog of runners, because they were only about 3/4 of the a mile into the race, and they had to cross that bridge, and which is not very wide, and they were backed up so much that we realized that that's not going to be a very good solution, so or workable thing to do. So the solution then was to move the starting line, put it where the finish line is going to be, and we did that, and that worked out to 3 miles. And,
so that's how the 3-mile came.
And when I measured it off, what I did, I'm sure people probably thought I was crazy, but I'd go down there on a Sunday or whenever I had free time, and I'd use the measuring wheel, and I'd walk from point to point, and I would, this tree to that tree is so many feet, this tree to this whatever. And so I would accumulate all these distances and then try to come up with something that seemed close, and then I would walk it. And I would walk from the starting line to this point, back and forth, until I was absolutely sure that this is exactly what we want it to be.
And so it measured out at 3 miles?
Yes, correct, yes.
Wow. Okay.
And then the other thing I did, it's kind of silly maybe, but back then, again, without the technology, in order to make sure that everything was exactly the same, I measured coagulator off of different trees or whatever a marker might be, but also I buried tin cans in the ground so that I could go down and find exactly where this flag goes, where this end of the starting line is, something of that sort.
So you could, and the flags mark where people turn.
Right, yeah. And I would even go down through the summer and then make sure the weeds were off of that by just finding my cans, pulling a few weeds around or the grass off of them, and but again,
are some of those cans still buried down there? You think?
Probably, yeah. Unless maybe some of the metal detecting guys have found them, but. Yeah, some old soup cans are buried.
That's amazing. So that first race, Dave Merrick was the champ. He had been the defending champion. He won the last race at Savoy and the first one here on the 2.67. And a young fella named Craig Virgin, who was a sophomore, I believe ran second to him. Was that correct?
I believe that's correct,
right.
Yes.
And then it goes to 3 miles, and the whole thing exploded.
Right.
Because as a junior, he went under 14 minutes, 13:59, and then as a senior, in a race that I still remember watching, I mean, just the ease with which he ran.
Right.
And went in 13 minutes, 50.6 seconds, still ingrained in my mind. But Craig Virgin became one of the greatest runners in American distance history. He was an Olympian in 1980, the year that we boycotted when it was in Moscow.
Right.
But still holds that record. I mean, did you ever imagine, I mean, great as that race was, great as Craig was, did you ever imagine that 45 years later you'd be sitting here and that record would still stand?
No, honestly, it's just amazing because there have been some tremendous athletes that have been on that course, but conditions just have to be absolutely perfect for somebody to pull that off, and that is an elite time. And he was an elite runner. There's no question. Craig Virgin, he's a 2-time Olympian, and I think a 3-time national champion, and he had a lot going for him. And you're going to have to be pretty tough to knock him out, knock him off the record book there. But and there have been some great runners, and maybe the course was a little soggy for them one day, or maybe it was very windy. So you got to have everything perfect almost to pull it off.
Conditions are huge.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And we've talked about this more so as they've added girls, and then 2-class for both, and then now 3-class for both. So there's 6 races.
Right.
And things being the way they are, and this is really interesting to me too, because Craig Version was from Lebanon, Illinois, down in your neck of the woods. You grew up outside St. Louis, and Lebanon was what would be a Class 1A school in the 3A system today.
Correct.
And yet he wins the whole thing, and his personality and so forth got other kids in that area wanted to run too, and they had a team that was a top 5 team in a 1-class system.
Correct, yes.
And so he goes out and establishes this phenomenal record as a small class runner. And now you've got that 1A race. Those 1A start the day at 9 o'clock in the morning with the girls, and it moves on. So by the time, generally though, the preponderance of good runners, great runners, are usually in the biggest schools and the biggest classes.
So, yes.
Not always, but the biggest. And by the time they get around to run, that course has been run on 5 other times that day, let alone the rest of the year, but 5 times that day. And if it's damp, if you've had missed running, that thing is a slop hole.
Yes.
By the time those kids run, so you're not going to have a record on a day like that.
Yeah, and there's some occasions where maybe it's to your advantage to run later, because if you have a heavy dew, the grass dries, the ground gets a little harder,
not as slick.
And these other people have kind of packed it down
Right.
for you. So they've kind of created a little bit, or maybe a little bit better.
Advantage, disadvantage, just depends on the...
Goes back and forth, and I think the thing that's always to remember is the same for everyone.
Right.
But that person trying to break that record has got a challenge in many cases.
Yeah. I remember the day, I should have looked this up, but the perfect weather for distance running like this is usually calm. You don't want wind, but sun, clouds, it doesn't really matter. But that was a sunny day, but it was in the 40s, about the mid 40s, upper 40s, if I recall, and that's about optimum.
Right.
I mean, it's not too cold. It's not too warm. You start getting up to the mid 50s, people think that's still pretty chilly, but a distance runner can heat up pretty quick. And
that's exactly right. And I think that the conditions that day, if I remember right, were awfully good as well.
Yeah, they were just about perfect. And so on those perfect days, there were two assaults on that record in the last 10, 15 years. 10 years, I'm looking here at the numbers. Chris Derrick from Naperville came the closest in 2007 with a 13:52, missed it by a second and a half. And then in 2010, Lucas Versbekas from Orland Park went 13:54. And both those guys had great days, but ran into just little things. And I think it was Versbekas was the one where there was not a wisp of wind through the day until
his race. Yes.
Well, and not only that, it was the final quarter mile of his race as he's coming uphill up the park road.
I do remember that, yes.
And with about a quarter mile to go, there was just this light breeze starts coming out of the south and into his face as he's coming up that hill. And I remember talking to him after the race, and Craig was on the truck leading, that was watching, because he thought that this might be the day the record goes down. And he goes, "That damn virgin." He says, I'm going. He says, he must have breathed because it was just the wind came at me and he took it away from me.
Pretty powerful guy if he could control the weather. But there's another thing about the course too, Kirk, that it has been tweaked a little bit. But what we have always made sure of is that distance remained the same.
Yeah.
So even though the starting line a few years ago had to be moved in order to accommodate the classes that we were doing, the distance stayed the same, and that's why our triangle now is more of a rectangle than a triangle.
Right.
So, but the distance is the same. We wanted to make absolutely sure of that.
Yeah, and another little tweak, and again, the distance remains the same. On going over the bridge, it used to be just one little footbridge over that creek, and now it's 2, and that was basically set up because of this meet to avoid people. That were
we wanted to make sure the leaders,
elite runners,
were
not running into
interfere.
people who were running into stragglers.
We didn't want them to interfere with somebody that was further back in the pack. Right?
Yeah. So you've continued. I mean, as a coach, I know you went down there. You kept working it all those years, even when you had teams running, and then you retired. You're still working the meet in a volunteer capacity, kind of controlling the area that the media are supposed to go in.
We try to, anyway. Let's put it that way.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that.
But this is the 48th year that this meet will be in Peoria,
Yeah.
and that's a long venue. I mean, to have the venue at the same site. I think there may be a few other sports that may say, well, we've been in the same building, whatever, but we're real proud of the fact that we were able to keep this meet down at Detweiller for this amount of time.
Yeah.
And then there's only a few of us that have not missed any of those. And God willing, I can be there on Saturday morning, and that'll be 48 for us. So looking forward to that.
I look forward to seeing you down there again. Just besides Craig's record run, I mean, what are some of the other memories you have of the state meet?
I think what always is so thrilling for me is the local aspect of the meet. When we see our local people, and as example, Tim Bro, Janelle Deathridge, who both won. We had the Limestone kids.
Yeah, I'm forgetting names too.
Nicole Benson,
right,
and Nick Holmes. When those guys, I mean, they're repeating from the same school. The odds of that and the chance of that are just unbelievable. But anytime we've had, Notre Dame has had some great runners, Mary Jean Gilbert, and just I don't want to leave people out, but if you look over at the state, the fact that they were able to be that successful, and it just feels good when you're down there knowing that, hey, the local kids are hanging in there.
Yeah.
Gene Jones and Metamora, what a terrific program every year. They're in contention with something, and there are just so many good ones. And Elmwood has been so very good, and Eureka over the years.
Yeah.
And these programs are ones that you just enjoy going down there, knowing that the local people are in this meet and they're doing okay.
I remember when Eureka had that streak. Was it early 2000s? I think it was,
right,
where they won the Class A. This is before it was 3 classes; it was
right,
just 2. But on the boys' side, they won the Class A boys championship 4 years in a row, and the 4th year, they were just spectacular. I mean, not that they weren't spectacular, but they were extraordinary. Right. And we took the times that they ran on that day and overlaid them onto the AA race, the big school race, which Ellmers York did its normal. We're going to dominate everybody. They would have finished second to York in the entire state.
That's fantastic.
As coming from a little Eureka.
And that's one neat thing too about the meet, with everybody competing the same day on the same course. You can make those comparisons.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're not able to compete at the same moment against one another, but you can make that comparison on times.
Yeah.
So.
I remember talking to Joe Newton, the legendary coach who's now retired as coach at York, who put that remarkable program and streak together. Excuse me. And he had, he's on a time schedule. So the Class A boys race is not on his mind. He's got his guys primed. He comes down, they win their race. And I talked to him afterwards. I said, did you hear what Eureka did today? And he said, no, what? And I told him, and I told him about the overlaid the times. He goes, what color do they wear? I said, the green. He goes, it's all about wearing the green.
Okay, there you go. That's great.
Joe and the long green line.
Oh, so. and there's another thing about Detweiller. There's such a history involved, but and York High School has been such a big part of that.
Yeah.
They were the ones who. How many trophies have they won?
I think it's 28.
Not only championships, but second and thirds, and it's phenomenal. Their success down there.
Yeah, they've. I pulled this up this afternoon.
There's been different teams that have kind of come and gone a little bit with their streaks, but they have been consistent. Yeah.
They out of I don't know when was the first state cross country meet? Back in the 1930s, probably. Do you know?
First one was 1946.
1946
at Urbana Country Club.
So we're talking 70. This would be the 72nd one. Then that makes right. Yeah,
that's correct. Yes.
So out of those 72. Ellmers York has qualified a team for the state meet, 56 out of those 72.
That's phenomenal. Just phenomenal.
They have won a trophy in 45 of those. They finished in the top 10 in 55 of the 56 times that they've qualified. They've won 28 championships, 12 seconds, and 5 thirds.
Wow.
I mean...
Yeah, those numbers speak for themselves. That's just... we can't even wrap our mind around that. You know,
it's
so
just. I don't have this with me, but I have written about them numerous times over the years, and I in the research that I did a few years ago, I remember that they've got they've 2 or 3 of the longest streaks. I mean, they've won 5 or 6 in a row multiple times.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, it's just an astounding program. And
Joe, you know, and most programs, you know, obviously you want to get to the state meet, and you know you're shooting for a top 10 finish.
Sure.
You know, if hardware is available to you and possible, you know, obviously that'd be a goal. But for them, that's disappointing if they don't get a trophy.
Mm-hmm.
And so not to finish in the top 3. But
yeah.
You know, then as I said earlier, you know, with the local teams, you know, this year looking very forward to see Dunlap.
Yeah,
and
Dunlap
the girls. Chris Friedman was an athlete of mine over at Richwoods.
Okay.
And I think he was probably right around 90 or so he graduated, I believe it was, 90, 91. And, you know, it just makes you feel good knowing that, you know, here's a local guy, a guy who went through the program, is hopefully maybe using a few things that,
just
that we
a
did.
couple.
And obviously he's fine-tuned a lot better than I could because he's in the hunt this year.
So let's segue that in a little bit into coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about Joe Newton, and you know, such a huge part of his success. Obviously, part of it is, I mean, he can really coach and connect with kids, and that's a big part of it. But in this sport, which is, let's face it, most kids grow up wanting to be a basketball player, a football player, a baseball player, soccer these days, etc. You ask your normal 10-year-old kid, and he's not going to tell you, I want to be a distance runner.
Right.
And so you're talking about finding athletes, finding kids who might be good runners and getting them interested in, you're going to do what? We're going to practice, we're going to run how many? I mean, I remember when I ran for you, we had those summer programs. It's like, you know, the goal was, you know, if you can, at the time you're a varsity athlete, try to turn in 100 miles a week in preparing for the season. You know, and you tell a kid, you're going to run how many miles?
I think the real key to it, and I think, you know, like York and some of the super highly successful programs, is the numbers.
Right.
Because I always thought this way, and I don't know if there's any validity to this, but just as an example, if there's one really talented runner out of every 10 people, if I only have 10 people on my team, I've got one good runner. If I've got 100, I've got 10 good ones. Now I've got something to choose. You know, like if somebody gets hurt, you got a problem. You got somebody to step in. And so I think that numbers are really what we always try to impress in our program. And I always told the kids this. Running is really not something we're not asking you to put a ball in a basket. We're not asking you to do something, you know, superhuman here. Man has been running since he's been on the face of the earth. You know, he either ran to get his food or he ran to keep from being food. You know, and so it's, you know, it's one of those kind of deals. And, you know, it's just an extension of walking. So, again, getting back to how we would get numbers in the program, if I saw somebody that I thought had maybe a little bit of talent and looked like they maybe the right mentality to be a runner, we'd say, okay, you need to come out and you got to give it 5 days. And you can't stop after 3 because 3 you're going to be hurting. But at the end of 5, if you say, hey, I don't really like this, I don't like the people I'm with, I don't like you, you know what, I'll say, hey, that's fine. I appreciate you trying. I'll shake your hand when I see you the next day. I'll say hello to you. But you tried.
Right.
And I think that was really the key to our programs, was try to get people involved. And so, you know, many years we had well over 100 in the program, and that gave us runners to choose from. Yeah. And I think that's really the key to it.
Yeah, big part of it.
Right.
And it's a great sport. And once you get into it, like you said, after, I mean, the first couple of days, it's like, what the heck is going on here? Well, this is crazy. I hurt. But you get to where the hurt feels good, and then you love the camaraderie, running with the other guys or the other girls. And
there are very few sports either where the very best understands the slowest person also is doing exactly what I'm doing. So there's that respect for everybody. Right. So I think that really bonds the team because everybody's doing exactly the same thing, and that's huge.
And the other part about cross country that's different from track is that, excuse me, it is got such a strong team element. In track, the team element comes from scoring points and your top athletes, whether it's distance running or the field events or the sprints.
Sure.
How many events can I get them in? How many points can I pile up and use my best kids in as many events as possible to get points and hope that that's enough to win? In cross country, you want that stud runner. You want as many stud runners as you can get. But you're still dependent clear down to how good is your fifth man? How good is your seventh man? Is your seventh man able to beat one of the top five on your top rivals or more of them and better your score and push their score down?
Yeah, when your top five counted your scoring, and the low score counts, sort of like golf. Mm-hmm. And the idea would be to get those five as close as you can get them to each other. And there's probably not a cross-country coach ever that would not put on his tombstone if I just had a fifth runner. I mean, that is just the nature of the business, It seemed like you could always get three or four, but we always got to get that fifth guy up there to tie up the score. But power of the pack is what we used to emphasize, and I think that that's probably true in many, many programs.
And it's one of those things where you see those top runners. Oftentimes, I mean, maybe you might make the exception for a Craig Virgin, obviously, but for the most part, a top runner, it's like, hey, we need you to hang back. Give up a little bit of yourself, cut loose in that final mile. But for those first 2 miles, we need you to help bring the other guys with you, so we're as strong as possible at the end.
Yeah, we used to do a lot of trying to match people up. That okay, let's see if you could stay with this person through the race or whatever, and that way you had identity with what you were doing. You felt a little more comfortable with your race. And just like on Saturday, what's going to be so difficult for so many kids is that they are used to being in front, and suddenly they're going to find out that they're going to look around and see there's 20 or 30 other people right here, and they can't handle that.
Yeah, and you get lost.
So the mentality is really difficult, and just making sure that you're really into it and understanding that, hey, I'm still running a great race.
Right.
There's just a lot of good people here.
Yeah.
And
well, and in a pack like that, it's easy to lose sight of your teammates.
Exactly.
And wonder what happened and wonder where that support is.
Exactly, and that's why we were always trying to match people up, so at least you had somebody you felt comfortable with.
Well, I remember there, 1 year, and I think York did that. I think we took this from York when I was running for you at Peoria High, and our man Geza Arentrue, who's now the head official for the state cross country meet, just decide, because it was Geza's personality, he was a captain as a senior, and he was, by golly, he was going to take roll.
Right.
And we would run races, and you'd get to the mile mark, and Geza would start shouting out names, make sure everybody was together.
Taking roll while you're running, yeah, that's good.
And just because he was Geza, we would occasionally just stay silent.
Sure.
Until make him mad while he was running. Where are you?
Yeah. That's good.
So, little bit about you and your on a personal level. You brought with you today a Minnesota Vikings folder, which got our man Matt Dayhoff over here wondering, Minnesota Vikings, what's going on?
He's probably a Packers fan, but that's okay.
Explain why you have become a Vikings fan here. You weren't always a Vikings fan.
No, in fact, until 18 years ago, I was a Bears fan. But our son, he's involved in the business side of sports.
This is Steve, right?
Steve, our son, yes. He was with the Indiana Pacers for 10 years on the business side and in marketing and sales. And then he got an opportunity to get into football, and the Vikings actually brought him on board 17 years ago because they were trying to get a new stadium, and the Pacers had just built their new Conseco Fieldhouse, and he was very involved in the design of that regarding marketing, advertising, concessions, all those kinds of things. So, but it took him a few more years to get it. About 15 years later, they finally got their stadium, and he's got a terrific job with them, and so we're really proud of him, and we're Viking fans, diehards now. So.
I would say that the Bears don't mind. I don't know about the Bears, but anyway, so that's a good way to do it. And your wife, Susie?
Yes, she is also converted over now, and she's actually become a very big football fan. And first few years, I'd sit and watch the games myself, and then all of a sudden she started getting involved, and so now she's wondering, why are they not throwing the ball? Why are they, so she's getting involved, and it's enjoyable, and we have fun with it.
And she was a valuable coach's wife as well.
Oh, absolutely, and I can't emphasize enough what that means to have somebody at home that takes care of you and takes care of the kids when you're out and about and doing your thing. But yeah, that's huge. Our family has always been very supportive. Our son Steve and our daughter Becky, they both ran cross country and were 3-sport athletes.
And that's why you left Peoria High, right?
Exactly.
Which
and,
Corky Robertson has still not forgotten or totally forgiven you for.
I was called a traitor back then. And just to give you a real quick little tidbit on that, Steve, our son, was running for Richwoods, and he was a sophomore on the cross-country team, on the varsity team. And we were running a dual meet with, and by dual, I mean Peoria High School and Richwoods running a dual meet. I'm coaching Peoria High. Our son is running for Richwoods. I'm standing on the golf course over there at Donovan Golf Course, and I'm wondering in the back of my mind, who do I want to win? This is my team. I'm coaching. They've got to win, but that's my son. That's his team.
Right.
I want him to win. And so that was a real conflict. And just by a stroke of, I'm going to call it luck, I got a phone call from Ty Franklin, who was the Richwoods cross-country coach. And he said, and I used to joke with him all the time. I said, you got it so easy out there. Let me know when you're getting out. I'd love to have your job. And I'm just joking. Well, he called one day and said, I'm getting out. And if you want this job, get out here and talk to him. And that was a difficult decision to make because I loved what I was doing at Peoria High School. It was the only place I had ever been. I grew up there as an educator and as a coach. And to have that opportunity then to go somewhere else was very difficult to make a decision like that. But it gave me the opportunity to coach my son, whose team's qualified for state meet, my daughter, Becky, and her team's qualified for the state meet. And to be able to coach your own kids was something I would never, ever want to trade. And be quite honest, at school, I was coach. At home, they called me dad. And that's kind of how it worked, and it was fantastic.
Leave it on the course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, exactly right.
I don't know how you would survive that any other way. And then in retirement, you actually get to fish a lot.
As much as I can, yes. And I do go fishing and not catching. So I never say.
Sometimes that's the best kind of fishing, though, isn't it?
I never say, I'll see you later, I'm going catching, or I'm going hunting, I'm going fishing. So if I don't do anything, okay, so what?
And you got your start on that on the Mississippi River, right?
I did. In fact, kind of another story there is that most young people kind of get involved because maybe a parent, usually their dad, was a fisherman, and they started. In my case, it was just the opposite. I had developed a love for it because I grew up so close to the river and the canals there.
It was down in
the Cahokia, East St. Louis area, and because of that, I got my dad involved in fishing, and so it was kind of reverse. I did it so much that he thought maybe I should see what this is and how it works, and so he became a fisherman as well. So, yeah, that's actually, and be honest with you, it was just a great opportunity to get away. The phone didn't ring back then when you're on the lake. Nobody's going to give you anything.
Doesn't have to now either. No. You can throw it in the lake.
Well, that's true. Yeah, but it was a good way to get away. I just enjoy the outdoors and being able to be on the water like that is fantastic.
And the rest of your free time is spent, traveling and seeing grandkids? And
pretty much so, yeah. We've got 4 grandchildren. Our daughter Becky and her husband Scott are both teachers at Von Steuben Middle School. And they've got 2 daughters that are both in college, one at Southeast Missouri, a junior. The other is a freshman over at Indiana State. And then our son Steve and his wife Sue up in Minnesota. Both of their children are at Iowa State. One is a senior, and the other is a sophomore, both in business there. So,
Great. So life is good.
It's fantastic, and I've even gotten back into the business myself as a teacher's aide out of the Dunlap Valley Middle School. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this now 4 years, and my wife Susie's been doing it for 8 years. And it gives you're still in the business, but you don't have all the responsibility of a full-time teacher and all those things. I spend a few hours a day in the gym, a couple hours in the office, and lunchroom supervision, and whatever they need to have done, I'm there to help them out.
Excellent. Well, Bob, I really appreciate you coming by to visit with us today. It's
That's
been
fantastic.
A pleasure.
Yeah,
it's always good talking to you, and looking forward to seeing you again on Saturday at the state meet.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I'd like to just tell everybody out there that's listening that the state IHSA State Cross Country Championships will be contested at Detweiller Park this Saturday. That's November the 4th. The first race is 9 a.m. They go every hour, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1 and 2, starting with 1A girls, and they just alternate 1A girls, 1A boys, 2A girls, etc. So, and then they have the award ceremonies are every 2 hours, I believe. Let's see, 9, 10, 11. So it'd be 11 o'clock for the 1A awards, which they have together, 1 o'clock for the 2As, and 3 o'clock for the 3As. And they're all there in the park about a quarter mile from the finish area. So you can pretty much stay down there and watch great racing. There's a couple of people that are going to make assaults on Craig's record. They've run under 14 minutes for 3 miles, so Craig is going to be here.
Yes, I believe
to
he
see
is.
if he can
Correct. Yes.
hex it again.
Right.
But it's supposed to be nice weather, a beautiful day. So hopefully we'll see some great racing and enjoy that day. So once again, this is Kirk Wessler for the Journal Star Sports Writers. Remind you again, if you would like to subscribe to the Journal Star, you can do that by calling 309-686-3161 or go to pjstar.com/subscribe now. And with your subscription, you get free access to all the digital content on pjstar.com. Once again, thanks to our guest, Bob LaCroix, and thanks for listening.
Thank you.